Yo, welcome back everybody. It's your boy Sebastian, and I am showing you guys my top 5 plugins that I use in every single mix. But before we jump into the video, if you would like for me to mix your music, shoot me an email at divinemotherstudios@gmail.com or check the link in the description. I'd love to hear from you guys with details of your project. Okie dokie friends, so I'm going to show you guys the 5 plugins I use every single time in every mix, regardless of the genre that I'm working on, and in my opinion how they're really versatile and they can be used in a numerous amount of different ways. And really, if you guys just have some plugins like this where you really only have these 5 desert island plugins, you can pretty much create any mix that you would want with these 5 categories of plugins. So here's a song that I mixed back in November of last year for my buddy Roger, for the band Gnosis that he's in, and this is a technical death metal band, progressive band or whatever, and these 5 plugins are everywhere across the mix, and you'll see the same plugins come up over and over and over in different areas of the mix. So let me just quickly play you guys how the mix sounds, and then we'll jump into the first plugin. Okay, so first plugin that's up is an EQ. Now, this is the SSL channel strip that I use. Now, while not technically just an EQ, I do use the EQ section absolutely everywhere within the mix. It is on every single track practically, and it can basically do anything you want it to do in terms of shaping. Now, let me just quickly show you guys the kick drum that I got going on. Here is the kick drum. Okay, that is with the EQ. Let me quickly bypass the EQ and show you what it sounds like now. So pretty dark and pretty flabby, when before it was punchy and bright, right? So with this EQ, I got 4 bands and then a couple filters. Usually with kick drums, I like to filter around 40 to 45 hertz, depending on the speed of the song. I usually do cut anywhere between 12 and 10K, and then usually these 4 bands is left for my discretion. So in this case, I'm boosting about 8K, around 6 dB. I'm boosting about 3K, about 8 dB, and then I'm cutting out a bunch of mud around 220 hertz for about 13 dB. I'm not really boosting any low end because the kick already has some pretty cool low end, so I decided to leave that alone. Now, channel strips do have compression, and as you saw, I was compressing the kick drum a little bit on here. But however, the main focus here is the EQ. Let me show you guys the snare drum because that is also being EQ'd with the same plugin, just a different instance of it. So here's my snare drum. So that is how the snare drum sounds. Let me bypass the EQ really quick and then let's take a listen now. So a pretty significant difference. When the plugin's on, it's a lot brighter, it's a lot punchier, it's more in your face and more conducive to a metal mix. So it just goes to show how powerful a single instance of an SSL EQ like this is for me personally, and for really anyone else that learns to utilize an EQ like this. So the first top 5 plugins that I have, again, is going to be an SSL style EQ such as this one. Next up on the list is compression, and the tool of the trade for me personally is going to be this CLA 76. If I really had to pick one compressor to kind of use consistently across the board for all my mixes, it would definitely be this one. I can use it to control dynamic range. I can use it to stifle a little bit of the transients, to soften the attack. I can also use it to add attack and create a greater perceived response of the transients on drums or bass. It's a really, really great vocal compressor as well. Unfortunately, this mix doesn't have any vocals, so I'm gonna just showcase it on the bass here. So take a listen. The plugin is bypassed for now, and just hear how the bass sounds a little bit lumpy. Not bad, but if I instantiate it, you'll see that the bass is a lot more consistent and a little bit thicker. really consistent. And if I show you guys in the mix how that's going to sound, you'll see that if I turn it off, the bass kind of dies off just a little bit. And then when I turn it back on, the bass sounds a little bit more powerful. So let me go ahead and bypass this now and play you guys the mix. All right, and now let's check out with the plugin on. The mix is now pushing a little bit better. The bass is kind of up more front, and it kind of just gels everything a little bit better with the compressor on. And then I also tend to use it a lot on my tom bus because it is a great compressor for controlling the tom hits and making sure that they're even across the board. So let's just quickly show you guys the amount of compression that I'm doing on my tom bus here. So as you can see here, when he does a little bit of the harder hits, it pushes that back down a little bit, making sure that the toms all sound even across the board. Let me go ahead and play you guys that tom fill again without the compression, and just kind of pay attention to how the harder hit jumps up just a little bit. So as you can see here, that last hit kind of was a little bit louder than the other first two hits. Again, let me show you with the compression on, and just pay attention now how the whole drum fill sounds a little bit more even. Okay, and then bypass it one more time. So yeah, see how the toms kind of just dropped off a little bit in volume, except for that last hit, which kind of jumped up in volume. It's a great compressor for controlling dynamics, as well as adding character and vibe. Now, the next plugin on the list is a reverb, and my reverb of choice is going to be the Valhalla reverb, and as well as the Waves Convolution IR reverb. I use them for two different reasons, but ultimately, if I needed to, I could only use one of them. Either one would be okay. Now, reverb for me is just to add some thickness to the drums and some depth to the drums. I don't really use reverb on vocals, guitars, or any other elements other than really drums. Very rarely do I use them on any other elements of the mix. So mostly they're going to be on the snare drums and sometimes a bit of the kit as well. Now for me, reverb on the snare is going to be two things, a snare room and a snare gate. The snare gate is going to be more of a thickness kind of thing and add a little bit of a tail here. So let me just quickly show you guys what the snare sounds like without any of the reverb here from the gated reverb. Okay, now let's turn on the gated reverb and just hear how it sounds a little bit thicker and a little bit longer. So yeah, it increases that perceived thickness of the snare, which is not typically something that you would understand from reverb to be doing, but really that's a trick I learned from taking Jordan Valeriot's course, where he uses reverb as a way to thicken up a snare and not so much to add ambience, which is really interesting. However, ambience is something that he does and taught me as well, and that is going to be with the Waves Convolution IR. This is to add width to the snare, not so much thickness. So let's go ahead and play you that snare dry again. Okay, so that was a dry snare, and I'm going to instantiate this plugin now, and now hear how the snare just sounds a little bit wider. So again, it's not really adding anything else other than just a little bit of width. This is a really cool creative way of using reverb in my opinion. The problem with a lot of amateur mixes that I see is that these mixes tend to have drenched in reverb, and it kind of just clouds everything up. If you guys kind of just use reverb in a strategic way, you know, you have to understand, what are you going for first? Do I want to thicken up the snare, or do I want to add width? And just going to decide how you're going to use it. If you guys don't really have a game plan with reverb, then you kind of fall into the pitfalls of just drowning everything out with reverb because you think it sounds good, but then your mix sounds really cloudy and muddy. All right, moving on to plugin number 4, and that is going to be a delay plugin. And really, if I had to pick one, it would be the H delay from Waves, which is right here. This thing can do so much. It can be a mono delay, a stereo delay, a ping pong delay. It has different analog versions. I think one is tape, one is something, I don't know what they are, but you know, different analog versions. It has a high pass and low pass filter. This is definitely one of my desert island plugins, It even has a lo-fi button to just kind of make more of a telephone effect going on, which is really cool. And this thing is all over my vocal tracks and my lead guitar tracks all the time. And I love it for adding stereo width to lead guitars. So let me quickly show you guys some leads and how it's adding that width with this delay plugin here. Really cool. You can get these large soundscape and lush lead guitars. Let me play you guys for that in the mix, and then I'm gonna have it on, and then somewhere in the middle I'm gonna turn it off, and you'll just kind of hear that the lead guitar kind of collapses a little bit more towards the center. It sounds a lot more dry and doesn't have that kind of spaciness to it that we all enjoy from lead guitars. So you can totally hear when I turn it off that the lead guitars just collapse straight towards the center. But for that section, it needed to have this really wide, lush sound to it. And by using this delay here, we're totally getting that vibe. And it's everywhere on this mix. All the lead guitars are being ran through here. 1, 2, 3. There's a couple instances there. 2, 3, 4. There's another instances there and another instance here. So all the lead guitars are being ran through that H delay plugin, and it's really the main delay being used on this plugin. All right, moving on to our last plugin, and that's going to be a saturation, distortion / clipper kind of plugin. Now I have multiple instances of clippers and distortion and saturation, but if I really had to pick one, it would be this one, because it kind of lets me do the accumulation of all three types here. I can distort something, I can lightly saturate something, or I can ultimately end up clipping it with this plugin. And this is the X Saturator from SSL themselves. It's a really fantastic plugin for controlling dynamic range and making things sound a lot louder than they really are while reducing the dynamic range, which is really useful for drum transients, specifically on snare drum. So let's go ahead and go back to our snare drum. I'm going to bypass this plugin. You should hear that it bumps up in volume, but the dynamic range is reduced, giving us a lot more headroom in our mix. So as you can see, the dynamic range really didn't change. It's just the way I set this one up in particular, but it sounded about 3 times as loud than when I had it off. Imagine if you try to do that with volume, you would start clipping your meters and all that. So saturation and distortion is the best way to control dynamic range while increasing loudness on your drums. If you guys don't know how to do that, that is something that's going to be a game changer for your drum mixes, in my opinion, because it allows your drums to finally give you the headroom without clipping your master bus and the rest of the other compressors that start pumping when you have too much of an energetic and dynamic snare drum or tom or kick or whatever. Using saturation allows you to control those dynamics while increasing the loudness. And again, that's going to be a game changer for drums, as it was for me. It finally let my snare drum sound really, really loud without having to clip those compressors. So let's go ahead and bypass this plugin again. I'm going to play you guys the mix, and as the mix is playing, I'm going to turn it on and off, and you guys should hear the snare jump up in volume and then reduce in volume. All right, let's go for it. And there you have it. Those are my top 5 plugins that I use in every single mix, regardless of the song, the music, the genre, whatever. If I just have these 5 plugins, I can get away with mixing anything and everything and just using stock plugins for the rest of the mix on my DAW. So I highly encourage you guys to experiment with finding a really good saturator, a really good compressor, a really good channel strip EQ, a really good delay, and a really good reverb. And I truly believe as long as you guys learn those 5 plugins like the back of your hands, you guys are really going to have no problem mixing anything that comes your way with very minimal challenges. No problem mixing anything that comes your way. And with some creative problem solving, you can get over any hurdles that each mix may have with its individual sets of challenges. If you like this video, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Peace out.